Welcome everyone to the Mercedes EQS 580 SUV. I'm Tushar, this is Arun driving, and behind us is Gaurav Chandrasekhar aka GC, our camera person. And arguably we are inside one of the most tech-loaded cars that money can buy in India today. But one bit of tech that these European cars have introduced us to is ADAS, Advanced Driver Assistance Systems. And this one feature, or this one set of feature, it's been a hot topic of debate for the longest time because it's become more mainstream, even though it was sort of introduced to us through cars like the Volvo XC60, through what Mercedes offered even. But now we have experienced it in enough cars, in enough scenarios to give you a good enough picture about what really are the pros and cons of ADAS. And it's not just a broad stroke sort of statement making about the feature set altogether. Individually, we're going to talk about what feature we've experienced, what issues have happened, including some examples that we've seen online. So let's start off by a little bit of background. What all cars have we tried ADAS in?
Okay, let's go manufacturer by manufacturer. Okay, and this is completely limited to the Indian market. Maruti Suzuki, none. Toyota,
Innova, Hi-Cross. That's one I've tried it in.
Right, that's about it. Let's go Tata Motors.
Curve EV, Safari, Harrier.
Volkswagen Skoda's out of the question. Honda.
City, Elevate.
City and Elevate. Hyundai.
Verna, Creta. Then if you go into Kia, then you have the Seltos. That you've tried out. I haven't tried that out.
You've driven the Tucson though.
The Tucson as well. Yeah.
The Seltos has it. The Kia EV6 has it that we've driven.
Basically, we've got a long list of cars, different combinations. Some are only camera based, some are sensor based. So let's get into the first feature, the one that seems to be the biggest highlight and what got people interested in this bit of tech in the first place.
Right.
Adaptive cruise control.
Okay, and see, this is one feature that I think really sets ADAS to the test, especially in Indian context. Okay, now the basic funda of adaptive cruise control is simple. Based on a camera or radar input, the car that is following decides what distance it has to maintain from the car in front, and that is selectable for the driver.
Yeah.
Correct. So you set a speed, you set a distance you want your car to trail the leading car at, and that is followed.
Yeah,
except for
that's generally between 1 and 4 car distances, and that also gets flexible based on the speed.
Correct. But we're in India, and maintaining a fixed car length is nearly impossible.
See, I tell you what the core issue is here. Number one, a lot of cars that give you adaptive cruise control don't have regular cruise control. So if you're using cruise control rather, it is going to be adaptive. The problem there that comes in is if you're trying to maintain a fixed distance, like you mentioned with our kind of traffic conditions, it gets too reactive. And in a lot of situations where you would naturally, as a driver familiar with Indian conditions, let off the throttle, coast, maybe get a distance from the other car that's not all that, acceptable, maybe Europe or the United States. But over here, it's exactly what the norm is. The car is, instead of coasting, it's going to get back onto the brakes. Let's say you're in the overtaking lane, a truck has come across and there's a car in between you and the truck. That car has slowed down, so instead of maybe coasting in a situation where it would have been possible,
it would
your car
really jab on the brakes.
That feels unnatural, which means your brake lights are also coming on, which is going to catch the drivers behind you a little bit off guard. Then let's say that truck moved out of the rightmost lane, this guy picked up, he's getting back up to speed, and then the car is like, okay, I have to get back up to 80 because it's a preset speed that you've selected.
Correct. And so, it will do it as quickly as it possibly can.
Exactly.
So the whole point of adaptive cruise control is to ensure you drive in a stress-free manner, but it is the progression, it is the calibration, and it is the smoothness that a human driver has in terms of, say, probably the time gap between, say, you lifting off of the throttle, coasting for a while and then coming onto the brakes, or lifting off of the brakes and gently accelerating. That is kind of missing in adaptive cruise control in cars today. Most cars that are a direct plug-in play from the European markets, you'll find them maintaining hilarious distances from the cars in front. Like I remember I was driving the Hyundai Ioniq 5 with the adaptive cruise control set to 2, okay, which is technically 2 Ioniq 5 car lengths. I swear a truck would fit there, and I'm pretty sure I got cut off by a truck at one point saying, why are you maintaining so much distance?
That's the problem. It's maintained. So that's the thing. It's not the system's fault that is trying to keep you safe.
Yeah.
Our driving conditions are such that if you try and maintain what should be the ideal car distance between two vehicles, there's always a third guy that's just going to cram inside and try and take up the space that should be in between you two. So it keeps pushing you back. It's like there's something called, in India, I think you can sum it up this way: you have to strike the right balance between pehle aap and na. So you have to be in between, because if you show too much courtesy, you're just going to be left right at the back of the pack. Always.
Correct. And also, manufacturers who've kind of got the Indian not tailgating distance right. I think oddly enough, it's Mahindra and Tata.
Yeah.
At their lowest setting, I remember we were driving back from the Safari versus XUV versus Innova High Cross shoot. You were driving the XUV, I was driving the Safari, and at both points we were at the minimum distance that the cruise control allows, and it was fine. It was an acceptable distance where it had maybe a little less space than what it would allow other people to cut in, and it was maintaining. Now, while we're on the topic of the Safari, that also gives us a chance to talk about the stop and go function of adaptive cruise control, which I experienced for an extended period of time in the Safari during the first drive. And I have to say, it in ideal conditions, you technically don't need to drive the car, it will drive itself.
Yeah, it's very effective in that sense, where if you are in the right place at the right time in the most conducive possible conditions, you genuinely do see the value of these kind of features. And anybody who's an NRI, anybody who's driven overseas, you can tell that this feature is not a gimmick. It just gets that kind of character applied to it because of the kind of traffic conditions that we have. Because even with the Safari or XUV, where the behavior is a lot more India friendly, it still feels that little bit too reactive. And it's something that, yes, you can get used to, but you'll never be 100% comfortable with. So I would say that in summation, adaptive cruise control is a feature that's best used on highways that are sparsely traffic populated. So let's say you're driving from Udaipur to Jaipur, you're doing one of those endless sort of roads at
the Yamuna, for example.
Yeah, where there's not a lot of cars around for the system to get caught off guard. That time, definitely there is value if you're going to be maintaining a steady pace. The next feature, and one that is directly connected with this as well, is forward collision warning and of course auto emergency braking. Now this is possibly the biggest bone of contention, because again, because of the kind of driving conditions that we have, the car gets reactive and expects collisions prematurely a lot of the times.
You know what, before we discuss this, I want to share a chota kissa, okay, that had happened. And this is when I had actually appreciated auto emergency braking for what it is. We'll get into the problems that it causes, okay. Now, we were in Chennai driving the BYD Atto 3 that also has ADAS, and a typical small junction that passes through a village, okay, we were driving through, and a packed intersection. There's cattle, there are a lot of cars, there are a lot of these tempos, and out of nowhere, I kid you not, from a random bylane, a scooter appeared perpendicular to where I was, and he was completely in my blind spot on the left. There was no way I would have seen him. The car spotted it, did a little teet, and before I knew it, it jabbed the brakes, and I did not touch the person at all.
You remember the exact same thing happened when we had gone for the Mercedes GLC drive in Hubli. We were driving the C-Class down from the airport towards the hotel itself. At that point, we were driving on the left side. There was, I think, a Brezza or something in the overtaking lane, and a cat or a rabbit or something just jumped across the highway. Now, when I saw it, I was about to brake, but if this is the brake pedal, my foot was over here, about to go down. At that point, it intervened.
Dude, I had started praying for that animal already, okay? Because in that split second.
But that's the thing, right? I am attentive, so I spotted it and I was going to react to it, but it did show its value over there. But again, there is that risk element of the person behind you also being cognizant of such kind of sort of sharp interventions. So the problem that comes in, and this is something that's been happening in a multitude of conditions, is one, I think most recently there was this video that came out, I think I saw it on the Cars India Reddit thread, where somebody was driving the Hector,
I believe it was.
I think they were driving it in Chennai only, and it's at low speeds, like talking maybe 10-15 kilometers per hour. He's walking along on a crowded street. There's pedestrians coming along who obviously land up walking on the roads a lot because not every place has the best pedestrian infrastructure for them to walk on footpaths. This person is trying to get past in the front, the person in front of him. He just comes out a little bit on the road, and the car jammed.
Brakes, yeah.
Which happened. Then what happened is the car braked. The rickshaw behind him wasn't expecting it, because again, when you're driving, you're not just reacting to what's in front of you. When you see through the mirrors, you have a rough idea on. It's sort of a subconscious thing that you do.
See, in a hypothetical situation, if you saw a pedestrian slightly jutting out, you'd probably lift off of the accelerator, move out, and just go. You won't jab the brakes, right?
But that car did it. The rickshaw guy behind him went into him, and then there was another car behind him that went into the rickshaw.
Another Hector without ADAS.
Yeah, probably. So yeah, that basically is one of those situations, and this happened with the Hyundai Tucson. It's happened with a lot of cars where ADAS actively became an issue because AEB reacted in a way that would be ideal in the right conditions, but not natural in India.
See, in an ideal world where all cars have auto emergency braking, and if I stop, I know the car behind me will stop, I'll trust that feature, eyes closed. But if I know my car is a little quicker to brake and the person behind me is relying on pure visual and his reflex, it's going to be very hard for me to trust the person behind me, knowing that he'll keep my car safe.
So that is also the reason why, since we are in the Mercedes EQS, especially when it comes to these luxury cars, always when the drivers hand the car over to us, they say कि हम लोग सारे system बंद ही करके रख देते हैं, because especially when it comes to European cars, they are extra reactive compared to systems that are maybe developed directly with inputs from India itself. Like you have a lot of bodies that do LiDAR and camera testing and feed that data for machine learning and all that goes into a lot of these ADAS setups. And that is why AEB, yes, it's a useful feature. The problem that comes in is the selective scenarios where it will come in handy, you can never predict. And the end result is, and why people say that ADAS is a net negative in many cases, is because the risk that it can create can often offset any benefit it has in our specific conditions. Again, like we're saying, it's India specifically, and which is why I always say that it's not the fault of the system itself. It's a reflection of how bad driving in our country is.
No, so see, this braking system, right? It's not just for avoiding frontal collisions. Now, I remember I was test driving a Kia Seltos. My brother was driving, in fact, and he wanted to try out ADAS, much to the salesman's disappointment, where he said, "Ki, do not turn it on." And we pulled up on the side of the road, and he said, "Okay, I'll merge. There's absolutely nothing behind me," which in a normal scenario is 100% true. If you are driving like everyone in Mumbai drives, there was absolutely no issue in the way he was merging. But the car picked up a truck possibly that was parking behind us, detected, hey, if this car pulls out, that truck might hit us. It jabbed the brakes, right? So there are times where ADAS will actually catch you off guard, and quite significantly at that.
And this problem sort of gets aggravated when you acknowledge the fact that we as automotive journalists are spending our lives day in and day out testing out these systems. We've gotten familiar enough with it. For somebody who's experiencing ADAS for the first time, they're not giving it, like there's on test drives also, how much do you really get to test out these kind of setups? You don't get enough drive time. So for them to discover these things, that's why I always say, if your car does have ADAS, if you have paid for it, get a situation where it's going to be comfortable enough to just get some degree of familiarity with it, so that you can reap the benefits and not face any consequences necessarily. The next feature I want to talk about is lane departure warning and lane keep assist. This is one of those features that I find quite handy. Yes, there are situations where you do require the lane markings to be better defined for the system to actually catch the lane and stick to it. But when it does work, especially in systems that do have lane centering assist, it is very helpful on longer journeys, because it's just dialing those small little inputs constantly that generally add up a lot to, you know, deliver more fatigue over longer drives. And this is something that I especially appreciated when we drove the Thar Rocks down from Kochi to Pune.
Tell me about that. How was it?
So that's what, when you guys were asleep, at that point when we hit the, I think we went past, what is it, Happy Road, Best Road, what's it called?
Nice Road.
Nice Road. So when we were on Nice Road, at that point the lane markings and all were well defined enough, and I just had to make sure that I had some amount of pressure on the steering itself, but I didn't have to do any of those corrective inputs generally, especially the car like the Thar Rocks, you do require some amount because there is body roll and all. So yeah, this made the entire drive experience more comfortable. But also on the flip side, on certain points where highways are not defining their lanes all that well, the car makes at times assumptions of what the lane is. So that can in itself mean that it's dialing in inputs that you have to counter to get it into what is the actual lane required.
Okay, so there are times that is tricky for the system to read, because obviously not all highways have well-defined lane markings. There have also been times where I've noticed that highways have partial lane markings. Like most systems require two well-defined white or yellow lines on either side for it to understand, hey, this is a lane, right? Sometimes you'd just have it on one side, sometimes you'd not have it at all. So stuff like this genuinely confuses the system. Now there's one public service announcement that I need to make. Lane keep assist in conjunction with adaptive cruise control is the reason why you see morons playing Tash inside a car while sitting, letting go of the steering wheel. Do not do that. For the life of you, do not do that. It takes a split second for stuff to go wrong, and honestly, a grown adult should not be telling another grown adult to not die.
This is just one of the situations where, people need to understand the value of a holistic approach to safety, which begins with knowing how to drive, the risks involved with it, how dangerous it can be when you don't do it right. Then you start looking at things like crash safety, and then you look at crash avoidance advanced systems like ADAS. If you miss any one of them, you start misinterpreting and reacting in the wrong way to the other thing, and that's something that most people don't realize. It's a debate for a different day. But
net lane keep assist, lane centering assist, one of the more helpful features of ADAS. Just keep a light pressure on the steering wheel. It will, for a well calibrated system, it will work as intended.
And especially if you're one of those drivers who doesn't use indicators often enough, that is one feature that will teach you to do that, because when you keep it active, obviously, and you don't indicate before shifting lanes, at that point it's going to give you corrective inputs which you have to fight. So this will just encourage you to use the indicator more often if you aren't already. It's one of my favorite features to use. Even when I play Grand Theft Auto, I try and find some kind of modification to give my car indicators. I love it so much. Yes, I'm weird like that. Now, one more thing about lane assist is, internationally you may have seen or experienced these cars where if you give the indicator, the car is capable of not only shifting lanes but also making an overtake. But on the kind of road we are on right now, let's say it's a sharp curve and you have adaptive cruise control already engaged, lane assist is going to give you inputs up till a certain threshold, but after a point it's just going to disconnect, because it's not going to be able to give in very sharp inputs if you're going at a higher speed. Generally, these systems, dating back to what I think the first car I experienced it in was the Volvo XC60. When we were driving in the road up to Lavasa, somewhere on 30-40 kilometers per hour, the car is capable of going like half a log or slightly more than that by itself. But if you're doing maybe 55-60 kilometers per hour, at that point it's going to cut off. So that is something that you need to account for, that lane keep assist is exactly that. It's an assistance feature to dial in inputs to make it more convenient. But right now, at least based on the systems that we have in India, most of them are not going to be fully reliable to do those kind of turning inputs by themselves. And also bear in mind that there is this sort of disconnect that comes in as a slight disadvantage. Let's say you're cruising on a highway that has very often random puddles, debris on the road, and they pop up out of nowhere. At those points, if you are in that sort of zone where the car is accelerating by itself, braking by itself, dialing turn inputs by itself, you're not in the driver's typical natural autopilot, where you're being reactive to stuff as it happens and not really feeling it like some kind of separate activity. It's coming to you naturally.
For lack of a better term, you feel like a passenger in the driver's seat.
Yeah, so you get into that zone, right? You disconnect a little bit. So in those scenarios where you have to turn, then certainly you're going to be at that point not necessarily having the time to indicate and shift lanes, but lane keep assist is on. So it's going to give you a little bit of a resistance when you're shifting that lane, even though you're having to dial in an input that's being triggered by something out of absolute necessity. And there will be scenarios where the car may not recognize a car or something that's parked ahead of you. This happened with the Thar Rocks itself. We were driving down the road in the leftmost lane, somewhere 40 kilometers per hour. There was a car parked on the shoulder. It recognized the lane and was keeping into it, but it didn't recognize the car. So then I had to make a quick swerving move over there because I was expecting it to slow down naturally, which it just didn't do. So that's what the kind of scenarios that happen here can confuse these systems at points. The next feature is one that's my personal favorite because it's a very innocent, pavam little victim, and that is blind spot monitoring. So if you don't know already, it's basically that little light that comes on in your ORVM. But when you're driving in our cities, especially because of two-wheelers,
it's on all the time.
Something is always in your blind spot. So yes, it is a useful feature, especially if you're going to be driving on highways and there's going to be some car overtaking you from your blind spot, especially from the left side, which happens often enough. That time, yes, it is handy, but otherwise it might just land up being a light that's on in your overwhelm. It's not an annoyance. You know what? I think the reel that I think I'll have to find it, but if I can find that reel that I put up on my profile, I think it'll explain the basic experience of what happens with blind spot monitoring.
See, blind spot monitoring as a feature largely I think is useful, especially on the highway. In the city, it's a bit of a headache because you've got orange party lights just going on all the time. One feature that I think is the absolute best in the entirety of the ADAS suites that manufacturers offer is rear cross traffic alert. Especially when you're in a mall parking where you've parked face in and you have to reverse out, right, and perpendicular to where you were parked, and you do not know which car is creeping up on you. It simply gets the job done. Now, there are cars that do this with the help of sensors. Your Grand Vitara, for example, even though it does not have rear cross traffic alert as a function, as a subset of ADAS, it still uses its rear side sensors to tell you
on the camera.
To tell you on the camera feed, hey, something's probably coming. It makes reversing out of tight spots so easy that I think it is probably my favorite feature from the entire ADAS suite there is.
But there's a counter to that as well. Now, if you're going to be driving in, let's say, one of those Delhi old markets where you have parking on the side, or even in Mumbai, cross traffic alert, okay, fine, is going to be constantly going off. Because again, you have bikes, you have cyclists, you have rickshaws, animals, everything that's going to be coming in between, which means the system goes off on and on and on and on. At some point, it's just like, okay, fine, I get it. Nobody's going to let me through. Because remember, rear cross traffic alert, much like all of the other features, was designed for traffic conditions where drivers have some degree of courtesy. That does not exist over here. Everybody's like, Pehle mein, I am going to get through, I'm not going to leave space for you. Unless that person wants to take the parking spot you're in. Correct. The one you're leaving. So in that scenario, you're going to be constantly given inputs from that, which is still kind of okay because I'd rather know about it than not. But if you have rear cross traffic alert and braking, at those points you can be finding yourself in a sort of jarring experience where the car will automatically apply the brakes, but obviously there's too much to trigger these brakes as well, and then that could possibly become another feature that you're just going to go into the touchscreen and switch right off.
So that's the long and short of ADAS. I think, are we missing any feature?
So there is traffic sign recognition, useful at points, but again, our traffic signs, the application of them is very erratic. A lot of times the speed limits that you see are not going to connect to what the actual scenario is. Of course, they cannot account for any shifts in speeds that are very random at points. So yes, it can be handy in situations where you did not see a particular traffic sign like no overtaking or the speed limit, more importantly, or school kids ahead crossing the road as well. Yes, it's handy, but I don't see a necessity for a feature like that, especially in our kind of conditions. And then there's auto high beam assist, which again can land up becoming too reactive at a lot of times, because if you do have to keep high beam on, there's going to be random pockets where it switches the high beam off, where it's not entirely necessary. It gets triggered by trucks and all that are ahead, but not in a zone where they would have been blinded by your high beam either. It gets a little bit too conservative at points.
Like, see, I'd say it is not ADAS as a technology that is subpar. It is just that Indian conditions are a little too overwhelming at this point in time. When we have the infrastructure throughout. That is where we'd probably see ADAS kicking into full force. I'm pretty sure you could take any car in Germany on the Autobahn or something like that and blindly rely on an ADAS system. Can you do that in India? I would not risk it, not one bit.
So I would, in summation, say this. If you want to get a car with ADAS, by all means, go ahead and do it.
Yeah.
But if you do, spend time, and by time I don't mean one single drive, take dedicated time out to test out the system and get familiar with it, so that you can make the best use of it and know any of its quirks that might be reactive to Indian conditions. Second, ADAS should not be mandatory. This thing I maintain, no ADAS feature outside of maybe blind spot monitoring should be mandatory in the same way that airbags or ABS are, because our driving conditions are just not ideally suited for it just yet. So mandating them, I don't see the benefit of it at this stage, because our traffic conditions are just not conducive for them. And lastly, like any safety feature or any feature available in your car, do not misuse it. Do not give a good feature a bad name by bad behavior. Understand that in the name itself, it says advanced driver assistance systems. They are supposed to assist you, make your driving more convenient, make it safer. They are not a replacement for your skill, your caution, and your sense of responsibility.
Yeah, don't put the ass in assistance. So yeah, let us know what you think about ADAS. Let us know if you use ADAS on a daily basis. Any positive, negative experiences that you might have had, scribble them in the comments. We love reading them. Cars India Reddit, love that. If you've got any comments, please let us know. That's it for this video. We'll see you in the next one. Like, share, subscribe, all of that. See you.